Do you remember when you can just walk into a store or shop online and find a new graphics card at a decent price and you can just buy it? Yep, those were the days. Now it's 2025. Games are reaching 80 plus bucks. Prices of current gen consoles went up, and of course, GPU prices went way up. And these are just their normal prices, which they're never sold at, by the way. And you're like, ew, I'ma just keep my 1080 Ti. If you had one, can you? It's old. Will it still be good enough now? Well, let's find out. Yo, it's codename Catfish. As you can see, I am neither cat nor fish. I'm a robot. And this is the GTX 1080 Ti, also known as
the greatest graphics card ever made.
And
NVIDIA's greatest mistake.
Basically, it was a really good graphics card that I'd never had until now, that pretty much did everything at a really good value for its time. It's also known to have held up really well for the past 8 years since it released in 2017. But, does it still hold up now in 2025? Today, we'll put it up against some of the latest games and see for ourselves. So let's go and take a look at the card. Here it is, the GTX 1080 Ti. It's the Founders Edition. I bought this used. I don't have the box for it. As you can see, it actually does have a backplate, so it's pretty say-so. It has blower-style cooling. It's got one fan here to blow out hot air out from here. This is the SLI connection, where you'd connect another GPU of the same kind for more power. NVIDIA stopped supporting this since the 4000 series. For power, it's got one 8-pin and one 6-pin PCIe port, and for the I/O, it has one HDMI 2.0 port and 3 DisplayPort 1.4s. Obviously, this card is old and used, so there's a bit of scuff around. It's otherwise in pretty decent condition, I think. So the 1080 Ti released way back in March of 2017, 8 years ago, at 700 USD. Now 700 bucks is a lot of money, but it's nowhere near the $5090's $2,000 price. The card's got 11GB of VRAM, which isn't too much now, but it was def a lot back then. And it's got Pascal architecture. It's the next strongest in the lineup behind the Titan XP. 2017 happened to be when the first crypto mining boom kicked in, so the GPU prices were looking kind of dumb because of Ethereum mining. Popping it into my test bench, we're still using these specs. We'll run Windows 11 24H2, the Mobo's the B760 MPG Sonic. It's been pretty reliable since I had it. The CPU's the i7-12700K, paired with 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM at 6400 MHz. The graphics card's the GTX 1080 Ti. It sure is cool having one. The storage is a 4TB M.2 SSD, and it's all powered by a 750W gold power supply. The specs are a little bit ahead of the GPU's time, but they should all work just fine. For our setup, the CPU will be using these defaults, and the RAM's clocked to 6400 MHz. For the graphics card, I'ma run it at stock clock settings, and I'll adjust the fan curve so it stays cool. In some games we'll play today, I'ma be using an app called Lossless Scaling, which is available on Steam. It can upscale resolutions of games, and even add frame generation to help boost frame rates. With all that out of the way, it's playtime! Let's start with Marvel Rivals. We'll practice some settings at the practice range, or else would we practice them? Starting with native ultra settings in 4K, we can see that it sucks. This game's more demanding than I thought. Since this is an esports game, you def want good frame rates, right? I flipped on frame gen first. Now the game is averaging in the 30s, which is obviously not good enough. And now there's an even worse problem introduced. It feels like an additional quarter of a second to move around and stuff. Guess that's one of the banes of frame gen. The control input latency can get worse when genning off low frame rates. I flipped on FSR Ultra Performance with frame gen. The game's now actually running pretty well, averaging within the 80s, and it hasn't dropped below 70. The input latency also feels much lower than when FSR was off with frame gen. It actually feels okay to play. I'd say these would be the ideal settings for 4K Ultra, but let's be real here. Whether you're a competitive player or one salty motherfucker with skill issues, you're gonna blame the input latency from frame gen, right? So what even are the best settings to play on? Well, for 4K, I use low settings preset with XeSS Ultra Performance. Seems like I get more frames out of it than FSR. The game may not be looking its best, but it stayed above 60 FPS just fine, while averaging into the mid-80s. 1440p seems to be a sweet spot, using medium settings preset with XeSS balanced, averaging at 80, and stayed above 60 FPS. It dipped below when I died though, so if you want consistent performance, don't die. And for 1080p, I played with high settings preset with XeSS Ultra quality. It averages in the mid-70s, and it avoided going below 60. Overall, the game is completely playable on the card, but you'll have to be mindful with frame generation if you use it, since it can affect input latency, especially if the game is not performing well already. Triple Z is next, and we'll start with 4K high settings. I ran around Lumina Square, and so far, the FPS is averaging in the mid-70s, and it hasn't dipped below 60 frames. This is cool and all, but what about somewhere else? You know. I went to the Outpost map and decided to fight Bringer in Notorious Hunt. We're gonna beat him up. Now the performance is way past uncool. It's averaging in the mid-30s, while also dipping below. That's no good. It's very different than the performance we had running around Lumina Square. On 1440p high settings, it's averaging in the mid-60s, but still hovers below sometimes. This is a meh, closer to a no. Medium and low settings are a little better, but they're still dipping under. While not ideal, I don't think they're bad enough to ruin gameplay experience here. On 1080p high settings, they actually stayed above 60, and it's averaging in the high 80s. I think this is pretty fair performance. Obviously, it performs fine in 1080p, but it sure don't in 4K. So let's try out the duck app, lossless scaling. We'll have the game use high settings, and use these settings and lossless scaling to upscale from 1080p to 4K, and also mix in some frame generation, so the overlay's a bit off, and it also got scaled up with the game, so I turned it off for now, but we can see these numbers in the upper left corner. I'm guessing the left is the original FPS, which apparently got capped to 60, while the right is the altered one. As you can see, it's playing pretty well so far, and the game doesn't look messed up from frame gen this time. A few times it dipped under 60, which also affected the altered frame rate. But as long as it doesn't drop past 40 FPS or something, I think it should be fine. The lossless scaling seems to be the best way to play in 4K on the 1080 Ti. But if you're one of those that don't like fake frames, you can otherwise play at 1080p on high settings. So yeah, I pulled Miyabi and her engine, and she's kinda busted, at least for now. Time to go wild in Monster Hunter Wilds. As you may have heard, this game is difficult to run. In fact, natively the best we got is 720p with lowest settings preset. We're fortunate enough to average at about 30 FPS, and only dropped to as low as 27 throughout this hunt. It kinda feels like playing Monster Hunter World on PS4, but with lower graphic settings and resolution, so this seems playable, I think. But let's flip on frame generation. So it's averaging in the mid-50s, but just like what happened when we used frame gen with Marvel Rivals, the input latency has gotten worse. That's no good. I turned off frame gen and tried out FSR Ultra Performance. The game looks horrible now, but at least it didn't drop below 30 frames. Then I flipped on frame gen again with FSR Ultra Performance, and now it's averaging within the mid-60s. The input latency isn't as terrible like it was without the upscaler. It seems like the closer the frame rate is to 60 FPS, the lower the input latency will be from frame generation. Well, there's one thing we can still try. Lossless scaling. I set the game to 900p, and used medium settings with FSR balanced and frame gen. Wait, am I stacking up scales too? What do I even call this? Anyway, the game doesn't look too distorted this time, so that's cool. It's biasing near 120 altered frames, and with the base frame rate being mostly at 60, input latency doesn't seem to be much of a problem. The game's not looking very sharp, but this seems to be as smooth as I can get it. I know the 1080 Ti is 8 years old now, but I still think this game is horribly optimized. Having at least 2 DRMs running with the game sure doesn't help either. The only other thing I can think of that might be able to boost the frame rate further is by getting a better CPU. It'd sure be nice to have a 9800X 3D, huh? Gotta go fast. We're playing Sonic Frontiers, which normally capped to 60 frames by the way. I tried out both 1080p and 1440p on high settings. Both resolutions average at 60 FPS with a good percent lows, while dropping no lower than 59. No real issues here. But let's see how well the game runs in 4K. Starting with high settings, we're back at Chaos Island, and as you can see, the performance is Nah. Well, the frame rate can depth run at 60, but it often hovers in the 50s, and even went into the 40s. It's not terrible, but not quite ideal. I toned it down to low settings, and now the game's performing much better. It's averaging at 60 FPS, and it only went as low as 58, but then the cutscene ruined it by capping itself to 30 frames, which is dumb. I never really liked how the in-game cutscenes are handled, as cool as they are to look at. The explosion from this boss dragged the frame rate down, so this isn't technically ideal. Otherwise, the game performs well enough, I guess. You know, considering how fast Sonic is in this game, I always wanted it to run at a higher frame rate, so let's try out lossless scaling. I use these settings in the app, and use 4K low settings in-game. But after applying it, the base frame rate wasn't at 60 apparently. The altered frame rate's above though. While the game does look smoother, I think it can do better than this. I tried the adaptive frame gen settings in the app, and it made the game even smoother, but it's also warping the image. It's giving me a headache. I dropped the resolution to 1440p and flipped on high settings. Then I used a duck app to upscale it to 4K and apply frame gen. Now this is more like it. The game's now running at a near stable 120 FPS. It's not native 4K, but the game still looks very good. You probably can't see it through YouTube, but to me at least, the higher frame rate uplifts the experience of running fast, which is cool. Way past cool. We're testing Cyberpunk next. I'ma run the benchmark tool with some graphic settings for 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, and show you my results. For 4K, low settings with FSR3 performance actually stayed above 60 and averaged at 74 FPS. I also tried medium settings with FSR3 balance and frame generation, which also stayed above 60 and averaged at 71 frames. Dropping down to 1440p, I upped the settings to high and used FSR3 balanced, which ran above 60 and averaged at 76 frames. Then I tried ultra settings plus FSR3 quality and flipped on frame gen. It averaged in the 80s and stayed above 70 frames. And for 1080p, native high settings averaged in the 70s and briefly dipped under 60. The rest of the settings I tried for 1080p all seemed to run above 60 FPS. I decided to hit the road using 1080p, since higher settings perform better with it, but when I tested out native high settings, it ended up hovering under 60 in some parts. That's no good. I think just flipping on XeSS Ultra Quality provides the most ideal experience. The game performs pretty well, averaging in the mid-80s while staying above 60, and I think the game also looks very good. You can't use the in-game frame gen with XeSS, but you can use lossless scaling's frame generation. It seems to have no problem retaining 120 FPS here. The input latency doesn't seem to be an issue either, since the base frame rate often stays at 60. At least I didn't notice any more latency beyond recording from my capture card. Maybe the people who play Cyberpunk competitively would be able to tell you. Cyberpunk ain't really the newest game anymore. It released back in late 2020. Fortunately, the game has more optimizations now, because I'm sure the bench results would be considerably worse without them. Palworld's still in early access, but we're still playing it. I start with 4K lowest settings, so this game's performance can be a bit all over the place, especially roaming around. It's able to average into the 60s, but it drags under often enough. Wanna see how low it can go? Well, let's take a look. Yep. We don't have an upscaling solution in the options, so it looks like we would need the duck app once again. I also strolled through Sakurajima Island to look for the best settings for 1440p and 1080p. For 1440p, I found that medium settings was the best way to stay over 60 FPS. You still have to deal with stutters though. Let's see if we can catch this Lylene. Shit. We got it. Switching to 1080p native, it actually performs pretty well on epic settings. The frame rate's still all over the place though, but it managed to avoid going under 60 frames, and it's averaging in the 90s here. I think this is pretty satisfying performance, right? I used the duck app to upscale from 1080p epic settings to 4K with FSR. This seems to be the smoothest we can get in 4K with epic settings, though you might prefer upscaling from 1440p with medium settings since it looks a little sharper. Overall, I think the card plays a game just fine. Besides maybe 4K, which needs a little help from lossless scaling. It's been a bit since I played this, and that's why I don't have any other pals and stuff since the release version of the game. I should catch up, or in this case, catch them all. We're going on vacation in Venus Vacation Prism so we can talk to girls. It's a visual novel that's like a combination of the dating sim and Pokemon Snap. We're gonna have Honoka help us find the best settings to use. So with this game, I wasn't really sure the best way to benchmark it, and had trouble recording some footage for some reason. Graphics quality may be a little more important than usual here, cause one of the objectives of this gameplay is taking pictures. At the same time, the frame rate's gotta be as good as possible, cause you don't want to miss a moment cause of a skipped frame, right? We gotta target 60, that's the frame cap by the way. None of the resolutions using bilinear best quality settings were running at a stable 60. Also, it seems like the frame rate could be all over the place, from both the cutscenes and the camera gameplay, which could be anywhere at any place. Dropping to best performance settings helps us with the frame rate, but details are certainly looking worse. Just look at them shadows. Gross. Ultimately, I found 4K with quality settings plus FSR1 Ultra Performance to run very well while looking as good as possible. Well, it's the only way possible in 4K. FSR2 wasn't able to make the cut. The meshes, lighting, and shadows all look pretty nice. The hair, not so much, but I don't think it's too terrible. When you're taking pictures with the camera, the frame rate tanks, and then it recovers. Other than that though, the game seems to perform roughly at a stable 60. Apparently, the game's not available to purchase in every country on Earth at the moment. You know, I heard some guys with funny hats and eye patches sail to that ocean, then they came back, and told me that they really treasure this game, and they say it's priceless even. Kazan just came out recently. I don't know too much about it besides it being a South Korean game, but let's try it out. It starts with a cutscene, but I don't know what the settings are yet. It looks like it's anime styled. When I got control, I checked the settings, and it's capped to 60 frames. We can raise the cap or just turn it off. The game's set to 4K DX11 with high settings and FSR2 quality, but just like how Kazan is dragging himself across the ground, the frame rate's dragging around the 40s and the 50s. That kind of reminds me of the Soul Edge. I'ma just focus on the DX11 version for now. So I found that medium native settings in 4K actually runs very well. It's averaging in the mid 80s, and it hasn't fell below 70, even after we fell. The percent lows are pretty good too. We haven't gotten any stutters yet. Pretty seamless. I'm actually liking the gameplay so far. It feels more like a food hack-and-slash game, but with some Souls-like stuff going on. Not funky like Elden Ring. High settings was more demanding, but I flipped on FSR2 performance with it, and it was just fine. It averaged in the 70s here, while it avoided going below 60. I also did max settings with FSR2 high performance. That's what it's called here. It averaged in the 90s, but then I slipped to running from this fucking bear. At least it was just me who fell and not the frame rate. I benched 1440p with native high settings, which averaged comfortably in the 90s. No problems here. It's good when the dodge actually dodges attacks, you know. And 1080p with native max settings averaged valiantly into the hundreds. I lured all these idiots to fight each other, which actually worked out. I can poke them while they're not aggroing me. I saw this setting called AMD CACAO. I think it has something to do with adjusting the ambient occlusion. I flipped it on with 4K high settings and FSR2 performance. The game averaged in the 70s, and by some miracle didn't drop under 60. Yay! You know, this game runs pretty well on this card. It actually seems pretty well optimized. Ain't that crazy to see in 2025? In a time where high-end graphics cards are way overpriced, and low-end graphics cards too, even at their normal prices, and some newer GPUs having a myriad of problems like the RTX 5000 series, it can be difficult for PC builders, gamers, and creators to secure a powerful and reliable card. Some had resort to holding onto their old GPUs for as long as they can, like the 1080 Ti. For the most part, it seems that the 1080 Ti remains to be a capable card, which could actually keep up with some of the newer games released, but it's certainly leaning closer to a 1080p card now. It can at least do some 1440p still. Of course, the card struggled most with 4K, where it often needed help from upscalers, frame generation, or even both. But the one game that made the card feel really dated was Monster Hunter Wilds, where it struggled even at 720p lowest settings. We had to use frame generation from both in-game and also scaling to achieve a frame rate that's close to comfortable. The GTX 1080 Ti originally cost $700 USD, but in 2025 it could be found for sub $200. I wouldn't pay any more than that now. Another card like the ARC B580 could possibly be a better deal if you could get it closer to its normal $250 USD price, since it supports more modern features in general. So what do you think about the GTX 1080 Ti? Do you have a 1080 Ti? Are you still using the 1080 Ti? Do you think the 1080 Ti seen to change in 2025 and beyond? Is Ti supposed to read Ti or Ti? What does Ti even mean? Do you want a GTX 1080 Ti Super? Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, or you happen to find it useful in some way, consider hitting the like button and subscribing, and don't forget to share the video. Remember, with the power of 8-year-old graphics cards, I can become best girl. Yep, that should be everything. Bye!